I'm Bruce Sorensen, and it's my privilege to interview Dr. Donald Dohn for the AANS archives. Dr. Dohn, as our viewers know, was very active in the American Association of Neurological Surgeons and served as the president of that organization in 1979. Prior to that, he served on the board and also as the secretary. And it's a privilege for me to have this opportunity. I've known Dr. Dohn for many, many years, having had the opportunity to train under him. He was my mentor, and I'm a product of his great skill and ability. Don, good to see you again.
Thank you.
You know, as we sit here and talk, I guess that we are all sort of the products of our ancestors, and perhaps you want to tell us a little bit about your ancestry, your background.
We, in fact, had a Dohn family reunion a couple of years ago, and delved back a little bit. My great-grandfather, Valentine Dohn, came from Bavaria around 1837 to escape the draft. I always said he was one of the early draft dodgers. But in those days, they conscripted young men from all the different principalities and were sent to the Prussian army. So he came in those days. I had some other ancestors that were here in Revolutionary time days. That's sort of a German, Welsh, and English background. The families went to Pennsylvania and then emigrated to Canada. And my grandparents emigrated from Canada to the United States. That's how the Dohn-Pratt relationship started.
The Pratt was the English?
That was my mom.
That was your mom?
Yeah.
Was that the English Welsh?
That was the English, yeah. And one of my great-grandmothers was born on the Isle of Crete. Her dad was a British Redcoat stationed there.
Very interesting. Well, Don, you were born where and when?
Born in Buffalo, New York, August 16th, 1925.
Spent your early days there?
Yeah, we moved from Buffalo to a suburb, town of Tonawanda, or Kenmore. And so that's where I grew up and went to school and continued on even to college and medical school in Buffalo.
What was your father involved in at the time that you were growing up?
My dad, initially, following in his dad's footsteps, was a funeral director. I used to take a lot of ribbing about that in medical school. And in those days, there was a radio station called Digger O'Doul, I think, something like that. So I was Digger O'Dohn. And but he got out of that and worked for Pillsbury's Mills, which had a big office there all of his life. I think he was like an early computer. I suspect what he did is done by computer today, which was to keep track of all the grain coming in and the flour going out of Buffalo would come in by ship and go out by train. And then my granddad had a stroke when he was about 72 or something like that, and so he kind of had not prepared well for this, and he lost his business to his associate. So my dad, to pick up the slack, started up his own funeral business and kept his job at Pillsbury's. And I think that's perhaps where I got some of the habits that you were indoctrinated with, because he used to, he'd get up at 4 in the morning and go for his walk and then get to work early in the morning. And he was so well thought of, they would let him off anytime he had a funeral. And he did that till he was 65, and then he quit. So,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
What about brothers and sisters?
I have 3 sisters. I was the third, and then I have we were pretty close together, and then my youngest sister was 7 years later, kind of an afterthought.
Close family.
Yes, I think very, very connected family compared to nowadays.
Do you think that your father's funeral business influenced you at all in the selection of medicine? What do you think about that?
Well, it influenced me not to go into the funeral business. I don't think it did, really. I mean, I think he would have liked for me to go and follow him and his dad, but I wasn't interested in it.
School for you growing up, anything in that experience that maybe headed you toward medicine?
Well, for some reason, and I guess we never know these reasons, because I had no family connection with medicine. In junior high school, I kind of announced that I wanted to be a doctor. I remember that because my advisor, Miss O'Connor, said I should take a lot of Latin, which I always regretted, because I never used it, but maybe I did unknowingly. But that was the advice in those days, take a lot of Latin. There was one other doctor that came out of our grammar school, Dr. Walter Fix, that I kind of a role model. I didn't really know him, but we used to hear about him. And but that was really the only connection. I mean, then thereafter, you know, I kind of targeted my curriculum.
In high school, you involved in any particular extracurricular activities?
Football. Played football. We were bused to school, and from where we lived, which was far from the school, and so it was a little tough to. You had to get home somehow if you got into after-school activities. I guess the mothers in those days didn't run the same bus service as they do nowadays. And I was in the Latin club and a few other things like that, you know. That, but football was my my sport in those days.
When did you graduate from high school?
I graduated in 1943.
In the middle of the war?
Right, yeah.
Went in the service?
Well, I was drafted. I turned 18 in August, and I went in the Army. I was, I think, inducted December 15th of that year.
Tell us about your Army experience.
Well, I was inducted and sent by train, my first train ride, triple-deckers, bunks, to New York City, and out to Camp Upton out on Long Island, the induction center. And I stayed there for about a month and a half while they were trying to decide what I was good for, do a lot of testing and so on. And somehow the guy who was going to assign me fixed on one extracurricular course I took in high school, industrial chemistry. And I don't know why, but I got sent into the chemical warfare service and sent to Camp Sibert, Alabama. And I always said I fought the Battle of Alabama. But it was all right.
Good experience.
Yeah.
After you got out of the service, had you made some plans? Did you plan in high school to go on to college? Of course, I presume you had, but what was the transition there?
I wanted to. I don't think I had figured out how I was going to pay for it, because my family would have never been able to pay for me to go to college and medical school, I'm sure. But it was a real break for us, for the GIs, the GI Bill, and I had fortune in getting a Regents scholarship. In New York State, there's Regents exams where everybody has to take the same exam. And so when I came back home, I had a Regents scholarship that saw me through college, which was nice. So I saved my GI Bill for medical school, which in those days cost $800 a year. Instead of, is it up to 23,000 or something?
It's quite a bit.
Yeah.
So you really all the way through college, which was University of
Buffalo.
University of Buffalo. You were pointing toward medical school?
Oh yeah, no, I was in pre-med. Again, as I say, without any reason except some inner reason that I couldn't explain, but I was in pre-med. And in those days, you may know that one time you could get in with 2 years of pre-med and so forth. But by then they were pretty much asking for 4 years, and all the returning veterans were trying to get into medical school. But I managed to get in with 3 years, so it cut me back 1 year.
Did you go to the University of Buffalo Medical School?
Yes.
Was it difficult to get medical school at that time, do you think?
It was, because of the crush of veterans coming back. I mean, maybe it was tougher for the guys that weren't veterans. I don't know that, but I only applied to 2 schools: University of Rochester, which is close to Buffalo, and University of Buffalo, and I got accepted to both of them, but Buffalo was closer for me and easier.
In medical school, anything in particular that you can recall that pointed you toward neurosurgery?
Yes, very well. You know how maybe in your days too, everybody hated neuroanatomy, and the byline was, "Don't worry, it'll all come clear at the end. You'll understand it at the end." Well, of course, most guys never did. Somehow I just loved it, and and this was perhaps a real turning point for me. I had a professor, Grant L. Rasmussen, who had trained under A.T. Rasmussen, a professor of anatomy at University of Minnesota, who's Ted Rasmussen's father. But Rasmussen, Grant L., my professor, was not related in any way, but incidentally came from Salt Lake City. And Bruce is from Salt Lake City. And he had a research program. His special interest was the auditory system. And so I asked him if there was some opportunity that I could do some research with him, and he provided me the opportunity. So all during medical school I would do this, sometime in the summers and during the regular school. I was studying the lateral lemniscus in the cat brain, but I enjoyed it. And then, of course, in those days, we had pretty close contact with the clinical services, and in our freshman year, Wallace Hamby came to lecture to us, and he, of course, was Mr. Neurosurgery in Buffalo, and he was a professor of neurosurgery and neurology. And so I thought it would be good to train with him, but by then I'd had 7 years of University of Buffalo, and I think he influenced me perhaps to go into neurosurgery, but maybe go back where he trained, the clinic.
Did you take an elective with him, or do they have that such thing, or were you on his service during your medical school years?
Yeah, in my senior year, I took an elective, and also in my internship, I took a rotating internship, surgical rotation, not weighted in surgery, not entirely. And I took a month of rotation through there, and it was a good experience.
Did you have your internship at the University of Buffalo?
Yeah, Buffalo General Hospital.
Buffalo General.
Yeah.
And that's where Dr. Hamby did most of his surgery there?
Yeah, he operated there in a children's hospital. I had a few months there at children's. Mm-hmm. Not in neurosurgery.
Tell me your first experience at the clinic. Did you go down for an interview, or was this all done by correspondence, or what?
I went for an interview. I had a fraternity brother. I was a Nu Sigma Nu. Quite a few fraternity brothers that were interested in neurosciences. Interesting. In fact, we invited Wilder Penfield down to be a speaker. We jointly sponsored it with the Academy of Medicine, Nu Sigma Nu and Academy of Medicine. That was very inspiring. but one of my classmates ahead of me, or fraternity brothers, went up to University of Montreal to train. And another classmate, Charlie Whitten, you may know, went to Cleveland Clinic. So I made one trip up to University of Montreal and visited there, and learned they didn't pay you anything. By then I was married and had a child, and then I went to the clinic, and it was sort of an unofficial visit, and then I went back for an official visit because it wasn't too far away, and was accepted there.
Were you the first one ever accepted the clinic that had a child? I mean, that was a pretty uncommon.
First one.
First one married.
Yeah. Yeah. As you know, Dr. Gardner said neurosurgery is a jealous mistress, and there were a few that were married while they were there, but I think I was the first one ever accepted that was already married.
When did you start at the clinic?
Well, I finished my internship in July of 1953, and started, in those days we had to take a year of general surgery after our internship, 3 years of neurosurgery. So I went there, and Gardner had just fired a couple people, as he was wont to do, and so I was pressed immediately onto the neurosurgical service for the first 6 months, and my general surgical rotation was postponed, but then I eventually took that. But it was, as I look back, it was good for me, because I was able to focus in on what things might be important when I was in general surgery to learn for neurosurgery, and I always felt that was a good happenstance.
Patient care and...
Yeah, and some things that maybe you would have overlooked if you didn't know what was going to be expected of you.
When you went to the Cleveland Clinic, besides Dr. Gardner, who else was on the staff as the staff neurosurgeons?
Dr. Bunce was there, and the day I left, or the day I arrived, I should say, Frank O'Connell, who had been, Gardner used to have the custom of keeping guys on as assistant staff for maybe a year or 2, 3, before they left to go on their own practice. And he was just leaving. They were having a goodbye party for him, and then there were no assistant staff. But then that was 53 July, but in 55, Pelle Tarnoy, the Danish neurosurgeon, who given the credit for the decompression operation for trigeminal neuralgia, came to spend 5 years. So that was a good experience.
Tell us, we're going to talk about Dr. Gardner, but tell us what your impressions were of Dr. Bunce.
A.T. Bunce was son of one of the 4 founders of the Cleveland Clinic, Frank E. Bunce. He trained in general surgery, and after the terrible Cleveland Clinic disaster in 1929, when I think 123 people were killed, when the X-ray film stored in the basement ignited and created, by the way, same gas as phosgene gas, there was no neurosurgeon. Ted Locke was a neurosurgeon who'd been there for about 5 years. He and his assistant both died. A number of the staff died, and a lot of patients. And so they were left without a neurosurgeon. And Bunce was pressed into service as a neurosurgeon and sent to the Mayo Clinic for 6 months, and to get his neurosurgical training. I always had the feeling that he would have rather have been a history professor or something. He was a real gentleman and a really nice guy, but he was uncomfortable in the operating room if things didn't go right. And but yet, if you looked at his career's record, I would say it was very admirable. A lot of things kind of fell in his lap that perhaps Gardner was too busy for, wasn't interested in, and he had accumulated a big series of torticollis patients that he had treated, a big series of spinal tumor cases that he had treated, and he did very creditable work. And he was a great friend of all the fellows. I mean,
I remember him.
Yeah.
As a sidelight, I helped him with his last craniotomy for a tumor.
Is that right?
Yeah, last one.
We hated to make rounds with him because he dragged him out. You know, unlike Gardner, who made his rounds precisely in 1 hour, he had to stop and talk to everybody, and you wasted your time, you felt.
What about Pally Tornoy?
Pally was I think it was a good infusion of other ideas into the clinic. And as it turned out, it was like a two-way street. I think all of us, having been indoctrinated with the boss, Dr. Gardner, kind of resented in some ways that he would come and try to introduce other things, but it was a very good experience for us because we learned that there's other ways to do things just as well, and also he had a very fresh approach to life, I think, in general. And of course, this interest in trigeminal neuralgia, I think, was very good. See, you graduated 64?
66.
66. So he left in 50, I think.
He left before I was there, but.
So that was good. I enjoyed it, and I've remained close friends with him ever since. You know, he had that unfortunate thoracic disc and was operated the old way and paraplegic, but he's done remarkably well.
He's a real gentleman.
Yes.
He spent a couple of days in our home in Salt Lake. Yes. Yeah. Dr. Gardner, a legend in his time.
And still.
And still. Tell us what your initial feelings were about Dr. Gardner when you started there as a fellow.
Well, of course, I think we were all pretty awed by him, and he was a very nice guy, but you never felt like you were buddies with him. I didn't until, much later in life, even when I came on the staff. As our friend Jerry Savas says, if he ever heard anybody call him Jim, he used to rankle. But and in fact, he would tell me to call him Jim, but he was still Dr. Gardner. But he was an amazing man. I mean, his interests were, to me, legion, and he seemed to not fatigue at all, and even later in life, when maybe he was failing in many ways, he still maintained his keen interest in neurosurgery and advancing various ideas about how things worked. I mean, I think a lot of us as neurosurgeons are content to try to to help people and do the best we can, but he was constantly looking for explanations of why and how and when, and always said that unlike the pathologist and the radiologist and the neurologist and so forth, we had the unique opportunity of actually seeing the brain during an operation, and he took advantage of it. I mean, the good example of that is his concepts of Arnold-Chiari malformation and the observations that he made. And just remarkable. I mean, there's so many different areas that he explored. I mean, that seeking the answers to, subdural hematoma and just carotid cavernous fistulas. I mean, you could go on and on.
Was it your impression when you were in training that he wasn't afraid to try some new things on patients, that he thought maybe it'd work? And
absolutely, and in fact, probably would make most malpractice defense lawyers cringe. But I guess in those days it was when things weren't, there weren't good ways to help people, or at least well laid out plans. It was accepted. But I think that's what made it so refreshing to train with him and to work with him, is that he constantly was looking for new things, and he wasn't content just with the old hash.
What particular things do you think that Dr. Gardner left you as a legacy?
Well, I think for better or for worse, being brainwashed that neurosurgery is a jealous mistress. And maybe I get imprinted too hard. And when I became the chief, I used to, not by example, but at least by counseling, try to counsel the residents and the young guys finishing that there had to be a balance between neurosurgery and the rest of your life. But Gardner didn't give me that legacy. I think the other thing is that he said you learn from the patient, and I think that's a very important thing. Listen to the patient, and that one of his other tenets is that first you must be a doctor, then a neurosurgeon. And I think that was a very important thing. And although he was a taskmaster in a way, he was a genial guy. Never saw him get lose control in the operating room, which I hope that I can say that I didn't. Unlike Dr. Bunce, if something went wrong, it would all fall apart. But he maintained control and was affable to his assistants. And the story I always like to tell is about R.G. Sehgal, a fellow from India who incidentally went to Dr. Gardner to get his permission to get married. He was helping Dr. Gardner with an aneurysm and standing on a platform, or needed to stand on a platform in the operating room. And R.G. spoke with that crisp Indian accent, and I guess the aneurysm ruptured, and R.G. couldn't see to suck, and the boss needed that, and R.G. kept asking for a platform, but he was saying, platform please, platform please, platform. And finally Dr. Gardner said, expletive, if he wants a platform, get him a platform. So, but didn't lose his cool.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting story about R.G. Going to the boss and asking for permission. I guess the boss told him, let me think about it for a few days. Yeah, that was funny. Incidentally, Dr. Gardner was known to the fellows as the boss, and that's what we called him, boss.
The boss.
What's your recollection of the fellows that were there when you were there, the residents and the fellows?
Well, of course, having stayed on, so to speak, I knew the fellows that I trained with and then the fellows that I trained. And just having gone to an alumni reunion there, I was reminiscing with some of the leaders there now that neurosurgery was unique, I think, at the clinic because there were no generation gaps. If you graduated from the clinic, trained there, you were friends with the guys who may have preceded you by 10, 15 years and the guys after you. And there was always that comradeship and collegiality that existed at national meetings and so forth. And it was very rewarding, I think, and still is. I mean, some of my close friends. I was invited back to the clinic to be the visiting professor a few years back, and so I gave a little talk on 6 neurosurgical service, Cleveland Clinic, 6 decades of service, and the first training really goes back to when before Gardner, but Gardner had trainees beginning when he was there. Hamby was his first resident, and they were outstanding trainees. And he was very strict about who he took and how they performed, and didn't hesitate to get rid of them if he didn't think they were measuring up. But during my time, Incidentally, I came there to, as I say, to neurosurgery, you know, being pretty green. And the first day they gave me a list. We had our rounds in the morning after the boss's rounds, and they gave me a list of 3 patients I was to do a milligrams on. That was my initiation into it. But they hard-working, and I think that was it's always been the way, and I'm sure it is in other services. But Ed Bishop was the chief when I was there. He had been in the Korean War and had a tremendous experience in neurosurgery. Had originally trained at Barnes and finished his last year with the boss. Abdullah, who came from Egypt, and myself, and then there were a series of guys, Miklos and George Angel, and just on, and up into the 60s when you were there. But I think we had a tremendous group of fellows. Still keep in close touch with them.
What do you notice now? Of course, you're not practicing now, but what was the basic difference in patient care back then as compared to now? There's some things that happened during your residency that you consider to be considerable advances that occurred?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I think we're driven more in later days by somebody looking over our shoulders. But nonetheless, I think the attitude about patient care hasn't changed. I mean, I see it at the clinic and elsewhere. I mean, we all want to do the best, but our abilities have blossomed so much so that I think, well, even in your time, when you finished, you could pretty much do everything. I mean, we were trained to do everything there, and that was a unique thing, I think, about the clinic. Gardner had a very prolific interest, so maybe the only thing that we weren't doing there was, and of course in those days nobody was doing it yet, but never got into carotid surgery. But other than that, I think did pretty much everything, and kept the backs pretty much away from the orthopedic surgeons. And but we had none of the amenities that make it so easy now. The residents would do the angiograms, and that was by direct carotid stick. We didn't have neuroradiology, and the resident would spend after rounds, he would go, after passing out the work to the junior residents, would go to the diagnostic room and spend his morning there, hoping to get, if it was a diagnostic case, getting it ready for the 1 o'clock surgery. And for some reason, neurosurgery, and I suppose that may have been the reason, did their surgery in the afternoon. It always used to amaze me that no matter how many cases we had, Gardner seemed to get done at 5 o'clock. Could never do that, but and then if there was a supratentorial tumor and the angiogram didn't really tell the picture, or even a posterior fossa, and then we would do a pneumoencephalogram, rather torturous procedure that I dare say none of the present crop of neurosurgeons know about. But we had a special old chair that had been converted with the back slats gone and the seat elevated, and
I remember that chair.
Yeah, yeah. Bob Takaguchi, who was the radiation tech, I think held the hand of every chief resident over a couple of decades probably.
I know that.
Then maybe if it didn't work, we would do a ventriculogram. And of course we were doing discograms in those days. Gardner didn't like to put Panapeg into the back. And we started to do, I think it was Abradil, or I guess, yeah, water-soluble dye that was very irritating. One of the things that had been introduced there before my time, but I fell prey to it, was thoratrash myelography. Bill Nossick, one of the early guys who had been there sort of as a junior staff or assistant, had introduced this, and it had been pronounced safe, but unbeknownst to them, there was long-lasting effect of radiation from the material, and 20 years later or so, they began to show up with a Carotid syndrome that was just relentless in its progression. I reviewed a bunch of those. And, and then we had the brain scan, which wasn't too much help in those days. And then the ultrasound was introduced. I know Tom Tank was very involved in that, where we'd just see if there was a midline shift.
I remember that.
Yeah. Was that in your time?
I remember that.
When did Tom finish?
Tom was a year ahead of me.
Year ahead of you, okay. And then finally, in the early 70s, a CAT scan came out, and that was like a revelation. And the clinic had the 6th one in the country. And people would come from California just for a CAT scan, because there were none out on the West Coast. I recently, after I retired in July of '91, culling through all my old slides and things, I came across some slides of a little 8-year-old girl who was a daughter of one of the doctors in town who had trained at the clinic. Can't think of the name of it, but she and her friend had been walking along the gutters of the school and fell, and not to the ground but down into a cellar well, and came in with a picture of a subdural hematoma, and we did she was unconscious, and we did a CAT scan on her, and it made the diagnosis, and we made some slides of it and so on, and she did well. Now I got this picture out. I couldn't read the darn thing. I mean, you know, there were, I think, 164, I forget what you call the little, you know, little particles. Yeah. That's not the right word, but I mean, I don't know how we read it. But
blurrogram.
Yeah, but it was a tremendous advance. I mean, for us then, it was great. Yeah. And of course now, with the MRI came out, and of course the brain scan was upgraded too. You know, and then of course we began to not have to. We got the water-soluble dyes, and I still occasionally would do a discogram for far lateral disc protrusion. I mean, even in recent years. Mm-hmm. But those things are the other thing I think that patient care-wise. And this was, you know, so many of these things were battles. I'm sure, I don't know whether you had to fight these battles in your place, but in our place, you had to fight a battle because it's a democratic organization, sort of, so you had to justify that. I was at, you know, Cleveland Clinic. Intensive care. I mean, I don't know if when you were there, we didn't have it. We had special duty nurses, and so I used to.
There was an intensive care, but it was not a neurointensive.
So there was an intensive.
There was.
Okay.
Yeah. Just open. It was just. It was
just about that time. Well, that was a big step. I mean, even getting a general intensive care, so we could at least take a patient there, and then the battle I fought was to get the neurointensive care, where people were trained to take care of the neuro patient, and then the battle was to get neuroanesthesia, so that people were tuned to the needs of a neurosurgical patient. But these are all, I mean, each of these battles, one, gained us a big step in patient care. And then, you know, as time went on, the intracranial pressure monitor and things like that. And now, when I go back to the clinic and look at the intensive care set up there with their computers and everything, it kind of blows my mind away. But it's been tremendous steps. And the other thing I think that that has happened, that for better or worse, I think for better, is the fact that people began to subspecialize. I call it super specialize, because it is. It's not a subspecialization. And that's really advanced neurosurgery, I think. And it has changed, and it's going to change the way we deliver neurosurgery. I mean, I think it's driven the patients more into centers where you can get a this and a that and then the other thing, somebody who's interested in the spine or aneurysms or so forth. And I'm sure it's a controversial thing with private practitioners such as yourself, but I'm sure you've probably experienced the same thing. That
It's happening.
yeah, and in fact, when I was in my, not the AANS, but in the CNS, when I gave my presidential address, I kind of touted that maybe we should consider that we needed to have neurosurgical centers. And I think it wasn't taken too well by the constituents.
What were the things, Don, that influenced you to stay on at the clinic as a staff man rather than to move on to some other place?
Well, it wasn't for the money. I can tell you that. In fact, when I started out, I made a few $1,000s more than I did as a fellow. I think the first year I made $9,500. And a year or so later, one of my colleagues in town wanted me to go in practice with him for $75,000. And I had to think about that real hard. But I think it was more the opportunity of a career there. And I guess if I had to tout up which things were most important to me in my career there, in addition, to being able to act as they say in the book, the history of the clinic, to act as a unit where you could rely on colleagues who were always available and easy to consult with and so forth, work as a team. I don't mean just in neurosurgery, but everywhere. It was the teaching program. And I really think that's where I got the most satisfaction out of my career was training residents and all that implies. And it's a very rewarding thing. Sometimes frustrating, but very rewarding.
You had a lot of interest at the clinic. When you were a fellow, what was the thing that you decided to write your thesis on? And how'd that come about?
Well, I had a couple interests when I was a fellow. One was Gardner was one of the early guys to do interbody fixation, and so that was my job to follow them, and I followed them. And first he did with autogenous bone. Then he did with fusions with what he called os purum, which was some sort of purified calf bone, I suppose somewhat similar to keel bone. And then he started, I'm sure you came against this, the lucite blocks, which became the bane of my existence ultimately, because it was a good idea, but technically they were hard to keep in place, and I've drilled out many of those later on. So that was one of my projects. The other was the carotid cavernous fistulas that Wallace Hamby and I had reviewed. For some reason I reviewed that, got interested in that, and in fact I think he presented that to the Congress as one of his, when he was the honored guest with the Congress. So that was of interest to me. Those are the, I guess, the things that come to my mind right now.
Sympathetic surgery.
Yeah. Well, that was, I guess that was after I came on the staff. And that, again, that was one of the things that made the clinic unique. I don't mean just sympathetic surgery, but there really wasn't anything in neurosurgery that we weren't exposed to, unlike now. In fact, I dare say there aren't too many neurosurgical programs that even do sympathetic surgery. And of course, at one time, during the war and afterwards, it was a very common operation. And during the time when there was no good treatment for hypertension, it was an important treatment. I think I did a couple cases for hypertension. One of the early Irving Page lecturers at the clinic said that before the days of any effective drugs, the only persons that could control hypertension were the neurosurgeons. But the boss was interested in the sympathetic nervous system, and I guess I kind of moved into that and reported 8 cases of hyperhidrosis, sweaty palms that we had operated. One of the residents and I reported it in the Cleveland Clinic Quarterly, I think it was. And one thing led to another. I mean, I've reported it since that time, but I think like Time magazine picked that up, and that brought us a bunch of patients. And then one of the other free journals that come to us picked it up, Medical World News or something like that. And so each of those, since this is pretty much a patient-referred problem, would bring us a great influx of patients. And then Dear Abby picked it up. Somebody wrote to Dear Abby asking about how to, describing the problem that the husband had, I guess, or something. And Abby said it was, her consultant said it was nerves, and it would go away. They'd outgrow it. So somebody wrote from Anchorage, Alaska, or somewhere, saying that Dr. Donald Dohn at the Cleveland Clinic can cure that. So that just brought us a huge bunch of patients. So that became an interesting sideline operation that very rewarding in terms of helping people.
You lived through a good portion of the Gardner era, and then the Hamby era came. What was the evolution of that? Was this sort of a transition thing, or what was the purpose for?
I think when Gardner retired, there was a mandatory retirement age of 64, and I was coming along, but I think when they were trying to decide who was going to take over, I don't think I even had my boards yet. I got my boards in 60, but I think they were trying to decide what the order was going to be. I think Gardner had originally thought maybe Pelly Tarnoy might take over, but Pelly remained too much of an independent character, I think, for most of the clinic staff. So he left in 60, and Wally Hamby, of course, everybody knew. He's very prominent in neurosurgery, especially as an aneurysm surgeon. And so the selection committee went to him, and I think it turned out, so about that time, the University of Buffalo wanted to go to a full-time system. So it worked out well for him. He came to the clinic, and I think it was a very good interim situation. I mean, he brought us something that Gardner hadn't had, and Gardner stayed until 64. I think is that right?
I think he left probably when I finished up in 66.
66, okay. But anyway, so they had the two of them there for a time, and Collis and I were, John Collis, who finished early in the 60s, went to Hawaii and Army, came back, and so there were 4 of us there then, and it was a good team. And of course, Wally wasn't a strong teacher in terms of, I don't think he had the same drive as Gardner, and I think I was coming along then with more drive to organize a teaching program. Maybe that was one of my fortes, at least at that time, to organize a more formal teaching program. Gardner was more to teach by example, and Hamby, I think he had enough teaching by then. So it was, for us, I think, to see him operate, see him handle aneurysms and other things that he was interested in was a real rewarding experience. I'm sure you yourself felt that. And he was a great guy. He just maybe didn't like. I always tell the story about I introduced the concept of having CPCs. I don't know if you were there still.
Yeah, I was there.
And rather than waffle about it, you'd have to, at the end, say, after all the discussion, where the problem was and what it was. You had to answer 2 questions. And while he turned in his, I said, I don't care. I don't know, and I don't care. So anyway.
You, during your time as a junior staff, and then, of course, as a regular staff, I became involved in organized neurosurgery. What was your transition into the Congress? How'd that come about?
I was chairman of the Ladies Auxiliary Committee or something like that.
Who put you in that spot? Who asked you to do that?
I think, I don't know. But that was my start. And it was like the liaison between the Ladies Auxiliary. It was okay. And it was a wonderful opportunity to get into what then and still is a driving force in neurosurgery. I mean, it's the young guys chomping at the bit, and I think the wonderful thing about the Congress is that you can't be the president after you're 45. That's not a bad rule.
That's not a bad rule.
And so I went on that committee, and then I think I'd have to look back at the list, but I might have become the sergeant at arms chairman, and then I was a residence chairman, and just
running on the executive committee.
Yeah, I went on the executive committee and
became the president.
Became the president in '71.
71.
Yeah.
Then
I must tell you, I was telling Carolyn today, my wife, when I was the president, Bob Ogerman was the scientific program chairman, and Ross Fleming the overall meeting chairman. I think that's right. And I can remember in a planning meeting down in Miami, where the annual meeting was, sitting out by the surf, and one or the other of these 2 guys came up with the idea of having luncheon seminars. And I think it was the first time that the meeting began to fracture apart, whether that's good or bad. But then after that, the AANS came up with the breakfast seminars,
that happened.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when you were an officer, you were the one that got me involved in the Congress. Went on as the host committee, and then became the chairman, then became a member and chairman of the registration committee, and then went on the executive committee.
Yeah, so I think the Congress has the member participation aspect of it that's good for young guys.
What about the AANS? How did you become involved with the AANS?
Well, of course, I became a member. You have to be boarded, as you know. So in 1960, I joined, and about that time, by then there were 5 neurosurgical organizations, national organizations, and some thought too many, I think. Maybe it still is right. But Frank Mayfield came up with the idea of having a kind of an overall organization that we began to interface with the government in those days in a big way, all these initial organizations. So he came up with this idea that instead of calling it the Harvey Cushing Society, it should be called the American Association of Neurological Surgeons, or at least that's what he vowed, that it should be one organization that speaks for neurosurgery. And it was kind of the Mayfield Proclamation. And boy, we had a lot of meetings. And he went around to all the different groups, and there was a lot of opposition to the idea, especially in the Congress, having these guys take us over and so forth and so on. Maybe there still is. But as a result of that, the board of directors was created that had representation from the other societies, and I guess that's how I got to go to the AANS as a representative from the Congress to the board of directors. And then I think after 3 years I became the treasurer, and then the secretary, and the president. Well, there was a tremendous evolution in the whole structure and the way things were done and so forth. And there was quite a startling difference between, like, the Congress did their own thing. I mean, everything was done by the members. And the AANS, it was hired. And in those days, Williams and Wilkins ran the meetings and arranged the exhibits and so forth. And Mike O'Connor was the guy who was the man who worked with us. And it had a lot of shortcomings. So the most of the work was done by the secretary. He kind of kept the thing together, and it was pretty disruptive to your office, I might say, because everything generated out of the secretary's office. Gordon Vandernort preceded me. I don't know who preceded him, but I just talked to Mike O'Connor about the national office yesterday, and I think he said there's something like 63 employees, and now they've moved, they have a warehouse and so forth, and it's tremendous. I'm just overwhelmed by what's happened, but when I took over as secretary, which would have been in the mid-70s, Gordon Vandernort drove his station wagon down from Philadelphia on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. I drove mine from Cleveland. We met halfway. We took all the stuff out of his car, put it in mine, and that was the AANS right there in my car. And so then, see, when I was a secretary, Lyle French was first president, Lester Mountain, and Charlie Drake. And it was during Charlie Drake's term, in his very, his incisive, clear-thinking mind, he could see the futility of the way we ran that thing. And I think by then he had been pretty involved in the American College of Surgeons. And so the concept, and then Charlie Brackett, too, who was the treasurer and then the secretary. Had, the idea began to form that we needed a national office and we needed an executive director. And it was during that time. And I think, I guess my year as president was when we first had it, And of course, Carl Haber came on the scene and has been a tremendous asset to the organization. I just can't believe what's happened. But we looked around Chicago at various places, even thought of going in with some sort of arrangement with the American College of Surgeons. They talked about maybe making another building and so on. And in the end, did our own thing, which I think probably was a good idea.
Yeah. It's made a big difference, hasn't it?
Oh, it's unbelievable. Well, of course, the organization and the meetings and everything, and the activities, the involvement. I mean, the national office was formed about that time with Charlie Plant, and it's just and the education effort took hold about that time. I think one of the guys, George Tyndall, was a real driving force behind that. And then, of course, each president seemed to come up with another great plan, and Bob King with the Research Foundation. I mean, it's just unbelievable. A
lot of things have happened. Yeah. How long were you the chairman of the department at the Cleveland Clinic, Don?
About 67, 68, until 81, I decided to leave the clinic.
Went into private practice.
Saw what it was like for the guys who trained there.
What was your thoughts when you went into private practice after having been in an academic teaching atmosphere all the time? Was it a shock, or was it?
It was a challenge more than a shock, I think. I mean, I don't think I think I saw something I didn't anticipate, but I was perhaps ill-prepared for some of it. And it was a great learning experience for me. And it's a challenge, and I enjoyed it, doing your own thing. Because, as you know, I probably hadn't written an order in 20 years, and then to start to take care of intensive care patients myself and so forth. And the nitty-gritty of, intracranial pressure monitoring and so on. I enjoyed it. The one regret I had, honestly, is that I hadn't had that experience personally before I began to teach the residents. You know, it would have given me an entirely different perspective on how to prepare people. And I'm sure that the newer guys who are teaching now may be having had that same experience. But I think going into private practice is a very leveling experience that would make a teacher a better teacher. I really do.
You were always compassionate as far as your patients were concerned, and you were involved in them and really took a personal interest in them. And I would have thought that that really had a significant influence in going into private practice. And I think that it probably was sort of an extension of that interest that made it possible for you to make maybe a more smooth transition than otherwise. Eh?
Yeah, I think unlike many of my colleagues, even today, who kind of remain aloof from the patient interchange, I think you're right. I like to have a close relationship with the patients, and that's one of the rewarding things I think in private practice, if things go well.
Cleveland Clinic, Fort Lauderdale. Tell me about how that evolved and you came back to be the...
Well, I went down to, after looking at several places, decided to go south, and we ended up in town of Pascagoula, Mississippi, which is, people wondered why I went there. I did too sometimes, but it was a great place. They opened their arms to us, but they really made it very good for us. John McCluskey and I were associated at the Singing River Hospital, and they provided anything we wanted. We had a tremendous 8-bed neurosurgical intensive care, all modern equipment, ICP monitoring and so forth, our own operating room. But I had a call from Maurice Hansen, one of the neurologists at the clinic, who was asking me if I knew anybody who might like to go down to the Cleveland Clinic, Florida, in Fort Lauderdale. They were just going to start a new branch there. And in the course of the conversation, he said, maybe you'd be interested. And so I began to think about it. My poor wife had already taken the bar exam in Mississippi, and wasn't too keen about leaving her job, but I don't know, I missed the fellowship and easy consulting and the team effort and so forth that the clinic provided. And the picture they painted of this Florida venture looked like it might achieve that. And well, so I decided to go there and to help them get started. So I left in January of '88. And left Pascagoula, left our house, and we rented our house out and we didn't cut our ties entirely. And so we went down to Fort Lauderdale, and it was a wonderful experience. It was nice to get back to the clinic. We weren't met with open arms by any means down there. The doctors there didn't like the idea of a group practice coming in, and a lot of opposition. But neurosurgery was the busiest service. I had a very, very busy service, no help. Used to make all the other surgeons assist me. Occasionally I assisted them too. I've done a radical prostatectomy, but turned out well. But then about that time I was getting close to 65, and I have a long list of things I want to do. And some of my colleagues that you asked about, the residents, the health problems began to come up, and some of them had died. And so I wrestled with this. I told them I wanted to step down, and they asked me to stay on another while, so I did that. And then finally, I was going to retire in January of '91, and the Gulf War was on. And think about 7 or 8 of the Pascagoula doctors had been called up in the reserves, including McCluskey, the neurosurgeon. So here we were already, we were going to go sailing. We had our boat and everything, and about just before Thanksgiving in 90, I got a call from the hospital director back home in Pascagoula. Would I consider coming to cover? So I went and covered there for 6 months, and it was good. It was a good experience. And then we set sail.
And that's what you've been doing?
Been sailing off and on. Some land cruises out to the west. My kids, I have 3 kids, all live in Colorado, and 8 grandchildren. And so we like to camp. We go out there and go camping and visit the grandkids.
Sort of special, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is.
Grandkids are great.
Yeah.
Well, Dohn, as we wrap this up, let me ask you, and you may have not given this much thought, but what do you see that's going to impact medicine maybe in general and neurosurgery in particular in the next few years, maybe for good or for bad?
Well, I think I have alluded to a little bit of that when I was talking about super specialization. And I must say I experienced some of that in my more recent years. Like you, I did everything except carotids. I even did a few of those with Clarence Wattridge, who was with us for a time. But I think you become driven, hopefully mainly out of patient needs and what's best for the patient, but also by the malpractice situation, to be very astute in your decision making about what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And I think this is good. I hope all of our colleagues do this. And I think this begins to direct certain problems in certain directions to people that have super interest in that, who do it better. And I think that's going to be one of the things that will really develop. And as you look around at the various training programs or major centers, you'll see that they all have their, as I said before, the different pediatric neurosurgery, spine neurosurgery, vascular neurosurgery, endovascular neurosurgery, stereotactic neurosurgery, epilepsy neurosurgery, and so on. And whereas this is expensive, I think it's the best way to deliver the care. And that's going to be the frontier toward providing newer and newer and better ways of handling these problems that, problems that we never could solve very well as we were. I was coming along, to some extent you. Carotid cavernous fistulas, for example. I mean, think of the evolution there. Of Gardner's idea of embolizing was revolutionary there, and now so many different ways, and so many different ways to treat aneurysms or AVMs or tumors, and it just boggles your mind. And using the technology is going to be driving neurosurgery. But on the other hand, the cost, and I think that's going to be a real battle. There's going to be a divisive battle in terms of government, the people, the insurance companies, the doctors, the patients. It's tough. I'm out of the teaching by quite a few years, since '81, so I don't have a clear picture, and I think this is appropriate to your question, of what are the young neurosurgeons and the young trainees like now? I mean, are they as dedicated as I like to think my generation, your generation were, or do they take a different viewpoint of medicine and what it means? And I think that's a very critical question too. Does that?
I think that does it. As we know now, there's certainly a lot more women going into the surgical specialties, and neurosurgery's sort of lagged along behind a little bit, but I think there are more and more of those. And it'd be interesting to speculate on what the future for them is going to be. And I think that here again, it's something we just don't know.
I trained one lady neurosurgeon, proud of her, Janet Bay. And, I'd let her operate on me in a minute.
Pretty
if
smart.
I decided to have surgery.
Well, Dohn, it's been a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk with you, and I want you to know that I personally feel very grateful to you for all you've given me, not only in those 4 years at the clinic, but so much after, and I count you as one of my dearest and closest friends.
Thanks, Bruce. I appreciate that. Ditto.
Thank you very much for the opportunity of being involved in this interview.